What's going on, beautiful people? Welcome to the show. I have set the intention for this show to actually not make any edits, especially for the long format. However, because we're still learning and we're still figuring this out, um, we're trying to figure out what's the best way to kind of flow. And I did want to have an intro for this podcast just because the way, like, the energy of the, how we came in. We already had talked for about 30 minutes, and I was kind of in a bad mood, and the energy just wasn't quite there, so we didn't record until maybe, that 30-minute mark, and then we kind of just jumped into the topic. And I wanted to kind of ease you guys into it because we do dive deep pretty quickly, and there is a lot that's covered. Again, we're still trying to figure out the best formula for this. A lot of this is, like, we want to be as transparent as possible. We just want it to be as genuine as possible. We don't want a script or anything. I'm not even scripting this. I'm just saying how I feel. And so I will, I'll give you guys a heads up with this one that there are some really key moments and really vital moments that I feel like are going to resonate with a lot of you. That being said, just the state at which the podcast is in, and just how we're, having to use internet to have the dialogue go on, the quality still, like, sometimes can cut off. And so there are some sections that you might have to listen to a few times to really get the entire, because we kind of build over time, right? You might even want to go back and watch the first episode, and we do go for 2 hours, but if you want to kind of skip through it or whatever, there's some really important parts that we keep building off of. Not all episodes are going to be like this. I'm not going to do an intro in every single one. We're probably going to figure it out over time, but I just want to let you guys know, like, there's going to be episodes that are different people. We have different people on. It's gonna be different types of energy. At this point, we want to just kind of lay the foundation, lay the groundwork, and that's really what we do in this episode. Is we dive deep, and it's a really profound conversation, really profound dialogue. I really highly suggest you listening to it all intently, and even taking notes and stuff, and seeing how it applies to your life, and if if you have any unlocks or any aha moments, we'd love to hear about it in the comments. This is a journey that we're all kind of on together, and so this is a little community that everyone can get involved with. And if you have a certain topic or a certain question that you want to leave to us in the comments, we appreciate it. Even if you want to hit us a DM if you know us already, just let us know how you feel about it, because we're always trying to I don't want to say we're trying to cater to we want this to be, I talk about this in the episode, but I want this to be kind of something that it's just different perspectives, right? I don't want this to be just one thing, or I don't want it to necessarily be kind of watered down. I don't know how else to put it, but I want it to be just kind of the energy at that moment, and that's why I'm saying this, is because I don't want to edit this other than this edit here. This is the intro. It does also cut off at the end, and so I'm going to do an outro. I'm actually just going to record that now, but grab some tea, relax, get into a good vibe. It's really nice to digest this, and maybe if you want to draw while you're listening to it, or if you're driving or something, or just kind of working while you can listen to this. It's great. It's something that I think I'm going to continue to listen to over and over again, because there are some things that really hit home. Even the first episode was the same way. I had to listen to it a few times. So yeah, with that being said, I will link into the actually how it starts here as well, because I start talking about the concept of how essentially uh if I can remember correctly, the way that, like we led into it with the first 30 minutes is we kind of were talking about how different beliefs are passed on and how these beliefs affect culture and society structures. And so the way the system is set up, whether you're for or against capitalism, that's on you. But there are side effects to having a system that rewards you within, I don't know how else to say, but a material world, right? Um, so we do dive into that, but I just wanted to kind of lay the, so you're not just thrown into it randomly. It does get deeper and it does kind of build up um, as to like how we got to this place. And we go deep into, I think later on we talk deep about like some potential alternatives. And so again, this podcast is one of those ones. I'm gonna say that there's some really really good stuff in here. So don't just pass up on it. Even like if you want to skip through it just to see what the vibe is. I think like an hour in, we have a whole other thing going on. So yeah, I advise you, you know, find some time to listen to this, even if you want to just break it up because there are different parts. But make sure you do listen to it, and make sure you kind of get the full picture because it does build off it. Um, yeah, it does build up throughout the whole episode. So that being said, enjoy, and I'll catch you guys at the end here. Yeah, so just to continue what you're saying, essentially what you're talking about is internalized capitalism, right? And you're relating it to like real world situations and how we created society after essentially chaos, which is World War II, World War One, and that was like when industrialization came. People started working in factories, and so this is when we were like getting like people like aren't really connected to. First off, like what you're talking about is yeah, we have generational traumas, right? I think people are more talking about that now, but there's also the disconnect of like trade and the origin of trade and how our economy evolved over time. And that actually links into what we're seeing now. I think everyone's talking about it. You go on social media, and now is the time everyone's talking about it. I don't really have to say it, but I will. Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies are booming right now. I feel like, that's like an evolution of, capitalism, right? And what you were talking about, just to reiterate, is you're essentially saying that people internalize these beliefs that things need to be difficult or that they need to be struggling in order to have value within the marketplace, right? And there's a lot to be said there. There's a lot to unpack, and I feel like a lot of people can relate to that. Is that how they find their worthiness is based on what they produce or how they perform or how much they're struggling. Like if you look like you're doing a lot, then people are like, "Oh, good job." Like even if you're not doing anything, for some reason in our society, it's like you need to be busy in order to have value. Even if what your busyness isn't producing anything or doesn't have any longevity or sustainable, right? So if you wanna link off of that, I kind of just riff, but yeah.
Yeah, true. I think there's definitely something to be said about, let me just unpack this. People that, how older generations and how people are raised and how they measure productivity. So I think a lot of people measure productivity in, say, mostly boomers and Gen X and some millennials. They were taught that you have to struggle to succeed. And I definitely think when you're in the workforce, if you if someone is in a position above you and they struggled to learn something, and then you can blatantly show that, oh, you don't have to struggle, it's just easy, just do it a different way. that's threatening to them because what people internalize is struggle leads to success. We have this idea that struggle leads to success, but really, in a lot of ways, it doesn't. Because when we were talking about systems, different systems, if you're operating in a system that makes you struggle, but it restricts your growth, then there's no way you're actually going to be able to grow to where you're supposed to be. It's an example would be if you take one of the best people that functioned in capitalism, you take some of the top people that they had structural ideas. Jeff Bezos, for example, like you can say whatever you want about him, but he had the idea of a system, and a system is what he allowed him to scale his business to being a billionaire. And he's not necessarily successful because he worked harder than anyone, and he's not necessarily successful because he's benefiting off the labor of others, because he is benefiting off the labor of others. But the reason people decide to work for him is he has a system that functions better to the point where it's monopolized the market. So that I kind of went off what my original point a bit much, but what I'm saying is you can accomplish more by not necessarily being stressed out. And I think that can be a threat to how a lot of people were raised, especially coming out of World War II. And there was a generation of people that were really, really struggling during the Great Depression, and they internalized struggle to their children that you have to work hard to be successful, where that's not necessarily true in certain systems that exist right now, because there are a lot of people that they do work really hard, but because of the condition of the economy, they can't really have the same rewards of previous generations, especially after the silent generation set the economy up. Boomers could buy all this housing, and if there's only so much housing, and it becomes that all this land is already bought out, and they're not developing areas anymore. It's just empty farmland owned by billionaires. So housing is more expensive, and then inflation is happening. Like that, your dollar isn't pinned to gold anymore. It used to be pinned to gold before Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. So
Yeah, I just want to
any
emphasize
money
that.
you,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, okay.
because I feel like
Yeah, true.
a lot of people, like especially me growing up, and this kind of but brings it together too. We're talking about the different generations and how things are passed on. I don't know if you've heard like the it was I can't remember. It was a social experiment where there was like the waiting room. Have you heard that one?
No, I've heard of the Milgram experiment.
Okay, I feel like I- forgive me again if you know me, and because I use this one a lot, but it was um, essentially there was a group of people that were told a set of instructions, and essentially what happened was there would be a bunch of people in the room. There'd be one person that's not like just a random person, so they're not involved, and there'd be like three other people or something, and they would just be waiting for maybe the doctor or something, or they were just they I don't know, but there would be a beeping noise, and as soon as the beep went off, the three people would stand up, right? And then the fourth person would would also stand up because they would feel the social pressure of, and they look around and be like, well, I guess this is what we do. This is just the behavior, and so they would stand up, and then next thing they do is they cycle people out, so they keep that one person, maybe one other person or something, and then they invite two other people, right? And then when the beep occurs, then the two people stand up, and then the two new people are like, oh, I guess we're gonna stand up. And then next thing you know, there's all these, they keep cycling people in, right? And everyone just starts standing up every time there's a beep. And then by the end of it, they go like, why do you guys stand up when it's a beep, right? They inquire, they're like, why would you do that? And they're like, oh, I don't know, I just thought it's what we did, right?
Yeah, no one actually told any of the original people to do that. I
Yeah.
do remember that experiment.
There's
It's
there's
similar to
other
the
yeah
Stanford prison, like the
yeah
Stanford
yeah
prison experiment, where I guess there was a button, and I honestly cannot explain this experiment. I'd probably have to look it up, but it was, I guess it was an electroshock button, or no, that's something different. That's not the Stanford. That might have been the Milgram experiment. But the Stanford prison experiment was you socialized people, and they took a bunch of college students, and they put them into different groups, and they isolated them into this area, and they said, okay, you're prison guards and you're prisoners, and you need to operate within the being a prisoner guard or a prisoner. You were given identities, and they put them in uniforms. And even though none of the prisoners actually did anything wrong, and none of the guards actually had any reason to yield any kind of or wield any kind of authority, they were punishing the prisoners, and to the point of the experiment where there'd be people like that were prisoners, and they go, you know what, I'm out. I don't want to do this anymore. And the guards wouldn't let them leave. After doing this experiment, I think it was a 3-day experiment, and people were like, yeah, you know what, this is actually getting out of hand. I don't want to do this. So it actually became this socialized thing where even though it was an experiment, people got socialized long enough to operate outside of maybe their moral landscape or critical thinking, where, oh, even though this is wrong, this is, we're doing this experiment. So even though someone says it's almost that joke of, when you watch all these shock videos on the internet where someone does something really socially shocking in public, then someone goes, "Oh no, it's okay, man. It's just a joke." But they're still doing the action. And then the person responds and they just go, "Oh, it's a joke. It's okay. Okay, that's funny, right?" And instead of just being like, "Well, you just did something that upset me or my partner or whoever I'm with, and it was distressful," or, and then now since you say it's a joke, that's supposed to go past. It's just weird how people socially, think about certain things. I
yeah
like
yeah yeah
how people can easily be manipulated, you know?
yeah This actually links to this TED talk I watched a while ago. And if people are like just tuning into this, this is the everything and nothing show. You can kind of see the theme here. We kind of riff off of everything and nothing. And so there's this TED talk, and the guy was essentially like training to become a monk. Okay, and he essentially got trained to understand what they call in Buddhism is called emptiness, right? And Shane, I think that this concept is what you're talking about. Um, and the example he gave was that the object that is at play or is being interpolated. So, this could be a currency that's being interpreted. Sorry, interpreted. Um, or it could be a pen, right? And the example he gave was if you give a pen to a dog, right? What is that pen to that dog? The pen doesn't have, or the dog doesn't have opposable thumbs, so it can't write, it can't use it like we would, right? That pen now becomes a chew toy, right? And so it's the same item, but how the person or being that's using it or interpreting it um, defines what it is, right? So
This is almost, sorry, go ahead.
yeah. So this is the concept of emptiness in Buddhism is not that things are empty. in material. It's that things are empty in meaning prior to being essentially given a use case, right? So if you are trying to push an idea, right, like taking the dollar off of gold, right? You have to sell that idea to people, to enough people, to convince them that it has a use case. You get what I'm saying? And that's
Yeah.
that's what is that is what creates the fiat currency, is that you're essentially using the concept of what we're talking about, right? Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist emptiness, and applying it to matter, which is a currency, right?
Yeah, it reminds me of Plato's theory of forms, I guess that kind of wraps into spirituality and I guess different types of religion like Buddhism. But I want to see if I can get just look this up just to get a basic concept of it. Plato posits that beyond the physical world we experience through our senses lies a world of forms or ideas. These forms are perfect, eternal, and immutable archetypes of essences of everything that exists in the material of the world. Transcendence forms exist independently of physical world in a realm beyond time and space. They are not bound by the changes or decay we see in the physical world. Perfection, each form is the ideal or perfection vision of what it represents. The form of the circle, for example, is a perfect circle, unlike any circle drawn in the physical world, which will always have some imperfection. So I guess that would be currency, or it could be many different things. This also goes back to Paul Young goes into this where he talks about archetypes, which I guess that is somewhat linked with Plato's
Mm.
theory of forms. I guess there's five here. So there's universality. Forms are universal. They explain why we can recognize a commonality among different instances and say dogness or goodness,
Mm.
personness. Even though no two dogs or acts of goodness are exactly alike, you can tell that, say, someone's being generous or maybe someone's, just being good in some sort of way. We can relate that or we can recognize that intuitively. And there's epistemology. True knowledge for Plato comes from understanding of these forms. Sensory experience is unreliable. The world of the becoming, but the intellect can grasp the internal truths of the form, the world of being. Precipitation, precipitation. Like, okay, apparently I can't read, but I cannot pronounce that. But particu persi participate. Like a participation trophy.
Yeah.
That's funny. I can't say that word. Participate. It's just I can't say it.
Well, explain
So
explain the context.
okay, physical objects participate in forms, meaning they share in or intimidate
Mm.
or they imitate. God, I can't read today. The property of their corresponding forms. So I'm gonna start that over just because it's probably horrible to listen to.
Well, yeah, and
The-
it's something that you have to sit, you have to kind of meditate on, to really like,
yeah,
yeah.
physical objects participate in forms, meaning they share in or imitate the properties of their corresponding form. This explains how things in the physical world can be said to be good, beautiful, or just by participating in the forms of goodness, beauty, and justice.
Mm.
Hierarchy of forms. This is another one. At the top of the hierarchy is the form of the good, which illustrates all forms, making them knowledgeable and giving them their value. The form of the good is to the intelligible world what the sun is to the visible world, providing light and life. And it kind of goes on and on and on. But
Yeah, I
yeah, Plato's theory of forms is super interesting. I really need to get more into that.
for sure. I had so I was talking to this person, and when I was like explaining this it's not this exact concept, but I was playing off of how as an individual, right? Like we are inside of this. People have a sense that like you're behind your eyes in this hardware, which is your brain, and your brain is essentially using nerves to connect to like certain systems. Like your eyes are essentially interpreting. For some reason, I keep getting caught in that word, but interpreting light, right? And then you're creating that image within your space of consciousness. So it feels like you're looking out of your eyes, but that actually exists in the space of consciousness, right? So your interpretation of the world, whether it's vibration that's bouncing off your eardrums, which is now, made into sound. So your conscious experience of sound is now, also within this space of consciousness. And then you have the feeling on your hands and your feet, like just on your skin. You can take those sensory inputs, and that's all being interpreted in this darkness or this void. Like even your eyes are a void. It's a pure black hole, and then everything that you're experiencing, everything that you're creating, is happening within that void. You know what I mean? So then I started thinking, well, everything that you're seeing, the light that you are interpreting isn't the actual thing itself. Even that, if you're talking about the spectrum of light, like if you're looking at the color green, that's not what if a leaf is green,
Yeah,
the green is what's being reflected off of the leaf. The leaf is
that's
actually
true.
the leaf is everything but the green, you know?
And you putting saying this leaf is green, the definition of this is green is coming from a place that's more green than what you're defining, which
Right.
kind of goes back to the theory of forms. But what you're saying when you're talking about sensory perception and how it almost makes me think about how there are a lot of birds that they see a lot better than us. So they have a higher degree of form of reality than we do. They can perceive something and that is more real than us because they have a better eyesight. And the same with just different like sonar, different animals that can sense sonar. But it makes me think a lot about the brain in a vat theory, if you know what that is.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just it's a philosophical experiment, or I guess it's a thought experiment. And yeah, I guess I'm just I guess I'm not riffing, I'm just looking this up, but
Yeah, well,
'cause I think
for people listening, like I feel like we're kind of building the building blocks for what I think is we could term like the first principles, right? So everything that we model like in the physical universe, our society, like it all begins with how you're interpreting your environment and how you're interacting with it. So it's to put it like in other terms, right? If you can understand how your mind is taking in data and and how we shape the world, right? Then you can actually modify how you perceive, right? So if you have it, if you're modeling after, it's like it's all you always have to question whether like going back to our experiments of the waiting room or the prison experiment, right? We're shaping the world based on what is essentially a shared experience, right? So if someone's really confident, um, like in Shane's example, where if the prison guard, if they're really confident in their role, they're going to be very very convincing that that's real, right? And so you can get tricked by that or manipulated, as we're talking about. And so going back to the first principles is how we build up to understand how our minds work and how we are actually modeling the world. And to me, I find that very empowering. I feel like if we can get to that place, then that's really how we can facilitate change and essentially make a world that um, is honest, transparent, kind, compassionate, right? So I think that quote that you're talking about too, that you looked up, I might have to listen to that a few times, but I feel like uh, understanding and being able to discern whether something is of good nature or a positive nature versus like something that's vampiric or negative nature, right? And having that ability, I feel like it's really important. So
Yeah, what you're saying kind of reminds me of, I don't know if it was Aldous Huxley that said this, but yeah, it goes to a bunch of nonconformity, and I guess they did different tests on the general population of how many people are going to think about certain behaviors within a group sociologically and how many people aren't, and they're just going to go to the majority of the group. And it was something on the lines of 40%. I don't know if it was Aldous Huxley. I really don't know who said this, and I can't really be quoted on it, but it was something like 40% of people within a population are likely to not be on either side of conformity or non-conformity to, say, propaganda or to whatever is happening. And they determine like the other two sides, where the other two sides, so there's this 40% are then, or it's an even number or something like that. I can't even get the numbers right here. But there's a group in between of people that resist. So there's a group that resists, that will resist to propaganda and will not follow it. There's a group that will blatantly conform to whatever the most people are doing. And then there's a group in between that needs to shift. So either the people in between will either shift with the group that will not conform and says, hey, this is bullshit, and then they will continue society in a certain way, or this group will shift to this other group. But it's just a matter of how everything, I guess, originates or moves. It makes me think of the American Revolution and how there was a lot of people that were British loyalists, and there were people that were loyal to America. And what people, I guess, a lot of people realize that there was British colonies on the east coast of North America for a pretty long while, to the point where they started getting their own culture separate from the British Isles. And with that happening, they ended up eventually getting their own printing press. So there was something around the lines before the American Revolution where there was a British soldier hurt an unarmed American or something. And then that was pressed in especially after tea, the tax on tea and all that stuff. But there was something that pressed them to push out some narrative. Well, whether the event was true or not, it let them push out a narrative to say, hey, we need to fight against the British Crown. And a lot of people that didn't agree with that, they went north. And it's just a matter of how you can have some kind of idea and be able to translate that. Where if you have a monopoly, like right now, I know it's kind of breaking down, but there's not as much of a monopoly on news as, say, there was a decade ago or even 5 years ago, where people are starting to look at these new news networks and they're really confused. Like, I almost look at people that would be considered, they're considered liberals, but they're like neoliberals, where they're almost conservative to the way what was considered to be left or something. I don't know if that makes sense. Same with, like, the status quo is breaking down, like Fox News, MSNBC, CBC, all these different things. Like it's almost like these do not seem when there's certain it shows that these aren't as reliable. Like they're not, this isn't God, basically. It's like these people can lie. When the general population start realizing that, they almost don't want to. They want to fall back into that. And then some people go, well, I want to get away with that. I want to get away from that if it's lying or something, right?
Yeah.
So I guess that was super, super run on, but
Yo, that actually 100% links into the theme of this show. And that's one thing I wanted to speak on is that this show is for the people, by the people, no judgment. We want our show to be accessible to everyone and anyone, no matter who you are, what race, creed, color, able bodied, doesn't matter. The whole idea of having um, news and media be so um, I want to say just like what's a good word
it's
to even
it's
describe it? It just becomes
it's it's centralized.
yes, yeah,
And
and
when media can be centralized, it can be manipulated through lobbying to benefit the interest of whoever has money in a market. And in Canada, the institution with the most money is our government because our government has more control than the market here, unfortunately. And in America, it's more of these companies lobby political parties and that influences media, right? So,
yeah, no, that I'm glad you said that. I feel like yeah, so I want I want people to feel like they can create and share their story. I feel like the more people kind of make this accessible, like I want people to feel as though this is possible and that they can share their story and that we are listening, right? And don't feel like you're alone in your journey. So that's really the intention behind this show is to get different perspectives, um, really a non-bias. Like you said, we don't want any sort of like we're doing this because we like doing it. We don't have any interest, we don't have any narrative, we don't have any agenda behind this. This is just people having conversations, people who've lived lives, had their struggles, sharing what they've learned. So yeah, welcome to
yeah.
the show.
Yeah, it's just openness. Honestly, I'm always open to personally, I've always been really open to hearing other people's points of view and if those can influence me or if there's any kind of information I don't know about that can correct some of my worldview or my viewpoints. I think it's really open to just having free speech. I think like free speech is probably one of the most important things in a civil society because if you can't talk about things, then you can't really move towards correcting things or you can't move towards anything, right? And I even think I would say I'm a free speech absolutist, where I guess the whole American idea of free speech is as long as there's no calls to action of violence, you should be able to discuss whatever you want, even if it's, if someone's hateful, like someone might hold bigotry, right? And maybe they just have learned bigotry, but them expressing that, you can sit with them and understand why they have bigotry towards whatever they have bigotry towards, and that can actually help them learn, right? Or if someone's super indoctrinated into a worldview, and you can logically go through that and try to show like teach them or just unpack what they're saying and see if it makes any sense, like
Mhm.
whatever it is. I think logic will always go beyond anything. And I think that's why free speech is super, super important. But
Yeah, on those lines too, I'm one that like I'm a believer in right speech, and that's the only way to really, like you said, like if someone's coming on here with um some sort of like dogma or some sort of, you know, I think it doesn't go away if you ignore it, you know? Like it might make it less potent, sure, but at the end of the day, a lot of the times um these people who, you know, let's say there's an example of someone who gets into like a KKK group or something like that, right? There was this love, it was a beautiful TED talk of this guy who was in a terrible situation, really down in the dumps, and was really struggling in life, right? And he was looking for answers. He never really had any guidance. And so one time, this KKK leader came up to him and was the only one who spoke to him, right? And was like, hey, like, we can help you. These people are the problem. I'm not going to name who it was, but if you come with us, we all your problems, all your pain can be dissolved. Join us, right? And he went down that path, and he, to this day, like, he's unrecognizable, right? He was reflecting and telling his story of how he went from that dark place to someone else, and I don't know the details exactly, it's been a while, but over time people actually gave him a chance, you know. They essentially saved him from that path because they were there with him and gave him guidance and you know, redirected him down another path. And then from then on, he dedicated his life to like making sure that this doesn't happen again, you know. And that's that's how I see it, is that when you recognize that a baby doesn't fear and a baby doesn't hate, right? There's actually an experiment where they had babies with snakes, right? I don't know if you've seen this. It's pretty recent, but they would have these babies around snakes, and then the snakes were like trained and everything, but the people, like the adults that were around, were not showing the child to be scared at all, right? And so the child was completely calm, was touching the snake, hanging out with the snake, had no fear, no signs of fear, no signs of hate. All of those behaviors are actually learned through the parents and how the parents respond. The child is always checking in on how the parents is responding and then mirroring that behavior.
yeah,
So
that's true. That's like most ideology is all learned, really. There are certain objectivities that exist, and same when we were talking about like Plato's theory of forms, right? But I think it almost goes back to Terence McKenna and how Terence McKenna always talks about how ideology is not your friend,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
because it's going to box you into thinking a certain way or to not be open to learning new things, which to a degree I agree with that. But to operate in society, like the current society that exists, you need to hold on to certain ideas for it to make sense. But to move on to maybe a future society that we're not there yet anymore, or some kind of higher spiritual grounding, you have to go from the assumption that ideology is bad. Like sticking to an ideology is bad. It definitely shows how any time in history where there's been some horrible thing that has happened that has gone against human rights has been in the name of ideology, whether it's Marxism or fascism. or democracy, you know, we're going to give you democracy. It's always backed by ideology, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and along those
And
lines, like um our ideas or our ideology doesn't define us, right? It's really just a thing that can be, you know, a tool, and it can be a way that we, navigate certain situations and certain scenarios. But it's not who we are, right? It's not, the core of our identity. Um, it can just be something that, is a tool, and something that can be experimented with, right? I feel like if we hold that perspective, that if someone's attacking your ideology, they're not attacking you. If someone's attacking your ideas, right? They're not attacking you, they're attacking the idea. And just because, you're using that idea or that ideology as a tool or whatever, that's not a bad thing. It just, at that time, that's, what you were using. And we can always optimize, and we can learn from different perspectives. And that's really the name of the game, is like, this ideology wasn't yours. It's not inherently yours. It was given to you, right? And so if we, like, our job should be to, like you said, like, hit it with a hammer, see if it cracks, see what the core of that ideology is, and see if it stands the test of time and pressure and stress, and see what is actually, like, what is the most viable thing, and how do we know ultimately?
yeah, I think bouncing off of that, what I find extremely interesting is the common ideology in the last maybe 10 years is being on the left and not even being liberal, being very far on the left, or being, because there's a North American liberal, right? And now it seems people have taken this definition and redefine what a liberal is to emphasize cultural Marxism or division within social class, or assuming racial differences influence your existence within society, where it has, like, there are socioeconomic factors of that, but it makes it, this is the root of how everyone should be viewed, and you should treat people based on their socioeconomic racial factor. And this is just this, I don't know, like a zeitgeist of how everyone thinks in the West right now, where a decade ago it wasn't like that. It was consistently moving farther and further to the left, to the point where everyone thinks outside of this zeitgeist is, oh, you're far right, you're a fascist, you're this or you're that, even if you don't even, even if you're not even on the right, you're just a liberal from, say, 10 years ago. And this to me really bounces off of looking at, say, World War II, where if you were present in Russia at the time or Germany at the time, so the Bolsheviks took over Russia from, the royals, and there was, Karl Marx, and then there was Lenin and Stalin and all these groups of these people. And socially, people had to, whether they agreed with it or not, they had this thought form that, oh yeah, I'm a communist. I have to be a communist. Or this is how I need to present myself in public, just because that's what the majority around me believe. And conversely in Germany at the time, you had to, everyone was a fascist around you, right? And that's what everyone believed, and that's what you were around. And I think people today, they really don't step back and think that if they were in that specific time period, living in that country under those societal pressures, that they would be so supportive of whatever they're supportive today. And to even think that they're immune from any propaganda that exists right now, because I don't really see that many. Maybe it might have to do with people getting to have a voice. Well, maybe like individuals don't tend to have as much of a voice in the mainstream. It kind of goes back to, this might be funny of such a bouncing off of this, but I know there's all these older people, like they'll be a boomer and they'll be like, oh man, jazz is dead, rock and roll's dead, or all this. There's no good music these days, but there's tons of good music. It just doesn't hit the mainstream anymore.
Mm.
Where I think there's tons of good ideas in how to operate a society, but it just doesn't really hit the mainstream. And I think people don't separate themselves from what is trendy, you know. And I actually, you know what, there's something, speaking of trends, I want to say something right now is today, December 8th.
Yeah.
Yeah, so makes me think of an album by Pantera, and it's called The Great Southern Trendkill. And it's about not being on trends, right? And killing the trend and being like, listen, it's almost like Jungian in the sense of individuate, who are you? Don't follow the trends, you know, because there was like grunge during that time and whatever was going on, and they were like, no, we fucking like metal. We're gonna play metal. We're not. We're killing the trends. We're playing this. But I guess this was on my mind because this was the day that their guitar player got shot, like Dimebag Darrell. So rest in peace. I thought I'd just bring that up, but it's it's like, yeah, it's like Great Southern Trendkill, like kill the trend, be an individual, individuate. You have your own ideas. Don't just follow a group blindly. So I guess I'll end that thought with that.
Yeah, I agree. I never like I'm not I don't have anything against trends. I think trends um like there's a reason, you know? I can't really ever put my finger on it, but uh yeah, I mean it's just culture, you know? And sometimes like things resonate within culture, and so um but at the same time I feel like if we get so caught up um on the hype of it, and even though it might not resonate with you as an individual, you know, like you don't necessarily have to just go and chase trends, you know, like I feel like if everyone did that, then there wouldn't be individuality, right? I think you can take your own spin, but I've always been a believer in, you know, creating diversity, you know, and having different approaches in general, right? Like I've never really discriminated, even if it's music. Like I never really like there's certain music I like more than other, you know, but I've always, you know, not always, but over time I've kind of evolved in my appreciation for different kinds of music, and I find when you understand the root and what was behind even the creation of the art itself, you know, that is where my love of music and just any sort of art and yeah and creative activity, that's what grew it, is being open and familiarizing myself with different sounds and different genres and, you know, different mediums.
I definitely think if you want to go to music, it's influenced on the people you're around, where trends aren't necessarily a bad thing. But if you notice that you're you can be open-minded, but at the same time, don't let a trend get out of hand to really take you
Don't
to a
Yeah,
place where
don't lose
you're
yourself in
you're
it.
not, yeah, you're not being true to yourself. And I think that's kind of what the whole trend kill was about, where this isn't true to me. Because it's so funny. It's like a libertarian, like, don't trend on me, like don't tread on me.
Yeah.
It's like, don't trend on me. You know, I don't want your shit getting in the way of what I want to do. I'll be open to it being there, but I don't want it to completely encapsulate to the point where it gets in the way of my creative expression,
Yeah, bro.
right?
Don't tread on Harambe, bro. Come on.
Harambe. Yeah, don't
Yeah.
trend on him.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the thing what was that thing about that guy? His squirrel got killed.
Yeah. Oh man, I can't remember
New
what.
new timeline shift with the squirrel.
Yeah, what was the meme that was going
Looks like a
around?
bunch of feds went into this guy's house and killed his pet squirrel for some reason. That's all I know, and I'm not even getting into this or like I'm gonna go on X and see what the heck this was. Feds killing squirrel. Yeah, now people are making memes on it being the Harambe was a timeline shift, and now this was another timeline shift. See if I can find this.
Do you know the name?
Peanut the
Is there a name of the
Peanut the
squirrel?
squirrel.
Peanut. It was
Yeah,
Peanut.
Peanut the squirrel. An orphan squirrel named Peanut, who
Oh
became an internet
no,
sensation, was seized by the New York State officials from his
not
caretaker, Mark
Peanut.
Longo, in late October 2024. Peanut, along with a raccoon named Fred, was taken during a raid in Longo's home in Pine City, New York. Oh, the reason. What was the reason?
I don't know. I
The
think
Department of.
they
Hey,
didn't.
I want to read this.
Yeah,
I want to read
read
this.
it.
Yeah, I want to find this for myself. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation acted on anonymous complaints regarding the illegal keeping of wildlife. Logo was in process of obtaining the necessary permits to keep Peanut and Fred, but hadn't completed the attempt. Euthanization? Both Peanut and Fred were euthanized shortly after being seized to test for rabies, following the alleged bite by Peanut to one of the DEC officers involved in the raid. So they go into this guy's house and say, "Listen, man, you can't have a squirrel," and by forcefully trying to take this guy's pet and going into his private property. So you go into this guy's private property, which is against the law, right? And then the squirrel bites you, and then you euthanize it because it bit you when you were trespassing on someone's property. We're in a weird world, man. We're in a weird fucking world.
uh,
Especially in American, the American way of looking at things is private property. That's like their whole thing is free speech, right to bear arms, private property. If you could take everything about America, you could pretty much sum it up into those three rights.
that's probably why it's trending. It's probably why it's a huge deal. Cause yeah, it's
Well,
ridiculous.
they treaded on them.
Yeah.
Oh, that's like the whole American thing is just being a libertarian. Now everyone's gonna be like, man, Shane's a massive friggin' libertarian, but I don't know, maybe I'm a libertarian. Maybe that doesn't affect my social views. People, that's another thing that I notice politically that people tend to do is they take your economic principles or whatever principles you have behind, you know, whatever, and in a way to create trends and groupthink and to create division between us and them, the media tries to impose beliefs on the right or the left instead of saying that this is a belief on said social issue. We're going to put that economically. And they want everyone to assume if someone says a left-leaning thing, for example, oh, there should be a little bit of taxation for a social safety net so no one's ever in complete squalor. Then someone's going to say, oh, so you're a communist. Or someone says, oh, I support the right to bear arms. And then someone will assume that maybe you don't support the right to choose or something, right? It's just I feel there's this weird dichotomy where people don't. They don't understand that individuals are individuals and they can have views on every specific down the ballot or down the list of ways of looking at the world. It's it's a very tribal human thing to want an us and them mentality when most of the people that they vote for one person because they think they're going to resolve the same issues for the reason someone votes for another person. They both realize there's issues and they both think there's different solutions to the same problem. So, yeah.
I don't know if this
But
is
man,
I don't know if this is
why'd they do that
random.
with the squirrel, man? The
Yeah.
squirrel, like, y'all still talking about the squirrel.
Well, here's the thing, right? I don't know if this is directly connected, but if we're talking about like governmental reform or like a policy change within, like look, one example, I'm curious your thoughts, and like I've thought about this a bit, but it's one of those things where it's on the horizon potentially, but we don't know how long. Could be 10 years. um what are your thoughts on like let me like frame this. So imagine if we had like we go on X, right, and we do a poll like Elon did with Doge or something, and we somehow figure out a way to do, like, let's say a nuanced version of like universal income, right? And just in like imagine a way, like, because I know it's kind of like this thing. Everyone's like, well, it just turns into communism, and but imagine like welfare programs, but like everyone kind of has a base level so that um you aren't in a place where like you're not in a place where you're in survival mode, okay? And like I'm curious to get your thoughts, but what I think is if you look at places with the highest crime, right? It tends to be where there's a lot of poverty. So I'm curious if there could be some sort of allocation of resources to just lift the bar just a bit so people are no longer thinking about, oh, where am I going to get food? And they're thinking about how can we collaborate and like build the society, and start like stop thinking about only yourself, only surviving. And now we're thinking about, oh, how can we actually like build this society and make art and make music? And I'm curious what you think, if it would all just like turn into communism or what.
I think this goes back to Plato's theory of forms because if our society actually encapsulated forms as they were, communism would be the most logical response. It doesn't. We don't live in a morally perfect society where people can hold power to allocate amounts of money without infringing on liberties of individuals because there are immoral people out there. And I personally do not disagree. It's a really tricky thing because a lot of money goes to national defense and goes to different countries. And I think you can have a line, right? You can have a line to keep people above living in survival. But the problem with that is that can influence economic output in the society we exist in right now because if you look at a lot of communities that say had there was poverty in them or like there was a divorce and then someone gets on welfare or someone gets on social assistance and they go you get more money for more children then they want to have more children, which I agree with having more children, but I guess to go back to what I'm trying to say here is when you're in survival mode in capitalism, it creates production and it's going to make you want to work to survive. But when you exist in a large scale society, I think communes work, but when something is as large as Russia or America, it doesn't seem like it works in that particularly system where it's that large because power isn't separated enough. And what ends up happening is people lose incentive to work harder because it doesn't yield the same rewards. Where if something is purely capitalistic and they say capitalism because you're taking money and you're putting it into capital. And what capital is it's owning property or it's owning something that yields you more money. It's the same thing when you look at people that are billionaires and people go, they need to distribute their wealth. And it's like, well, their wealth is allocated into that rocket over there, or it's allocated into these different warehouses that have money flowing. Money is moving. And when you have you something like universal basic income, it doesn't move money necessarily to people because there are definitely certain people that will continue to go, oh, this is gonna push me to do this. I'm gonna move forward and but you have to look at what money is and what money is it's a representation of labor. Labor gets put into money. Money can buy goods and services, or it can buy, and goods and services were created through someone else's labor. Private property is purchased through your buying power, which is backed by your labor, right? And when money gets given to people, then what happens is it's someone else's labor is being diluted to other people. So that's going to prevent people from having the same amount of drive to working harder. And it's really tricky because this is a worldview that I have right now. And it's a worldview that I've had for probably the last 4 years, where you can say that, but then you can also like I can say all these things, but then I can look at how taxes aren't allocated to other things, right? So our labor is also getting diluted in the sense where your money's going to a different country or it's not going towards infrastructure. So as much as something like UBI will dilute the labor of people, sending money to a foreign country will also dilute your labor and printing money to pay off different, getting government debt or that money goes towards a certain program in government that isn't serving the people or is just laundering, your money's also getting diluted. So I'm just thinking on the ball here where I don't necessarily think UBI has to really, I don't know if that's the problem of having a certain amount of money to get your food, or maybe we don't need something like that. Maybe, so I'm riffing right here, but
No, yeah,
I guess Elon Musk is making all these different lab robots that they want to use for labor, right?
yeah,
Let's say you live in a tropical society, or you're like a tropical region. Maybe you live below the equator and they start, there's some area, a group of people are living. You have these robots, right? And they just pick gardens and they pick fruit and they produce food for people. And then they build houses and they make sure there's housing there and they make sure that there's food. Because I don't necessarily think it's a problem in currency because we've been living in the idea of thinking this is currency, this is the most important thing that we have. But I think what's the most important is community, food, and shelter. And I think you don't necessarily need to give people money, but if you can secure their shelter, their food, and their community will help build towards people being able to go, this is what I want to do. Or there are people that will inherently be more valuable or offer more valuable value to society to grow it. But within capitalism, we've always been thinking we need to be on consistent growth, where if you look at tribes or you look at different island people, people that were living on islands, they didn't have to constantly grow. They just needed housing or they needed some sort of shelter. They needed a community where they could create, and then they needed food. And I think why a big reason why they don't want something like UBI, because that could, I don't know how much value that would have, but having housing, food, community, that would, it wouldn't put people in survival and it would stop this hyper production of an economy. But if they had, say, AI robots operating, they could continually produce forever, probably. So I don't know, then you're outsourcing something, your labor to something else. I'm just riffing a lot. It's just that
Yeah, I have a
I
few
don't know if it was,
points. I have a few points just
I don't
to
know if,
bring together.
yeah, go ahead, because I was gonna keep going off.
Yeah, I mean, we can bring it back to the like I I think you're right that it does stem off of the was it the Plato principles and Buddhist emptiness and it really does come down to like the societal ideology because well let me just say also in terms of how like our economics works and stuff right like uh our like the way everything's set up it's been this way for a long time but that doesn't necessarily mean that like this is how it has to look right at like what I think um our mindset is or like what the system has kind of allowed for is this fixation on only like the numbers on the screen increasing. And a very prominent example is right the core of society like society can't exist without an agricultural infrastructure, right? We live most of us live in cities, we live in urban environments, but if you went to the grocery store and there's no food, like you could not survive. And so you need agricultural systems, right? And so the way we developed it was that we put all the cities in the middle and then we put all the farms on the outside. And so we're not really connected to it anymore. We don't really think about it. But within this economic system, what we now have is that we have industrialized farming, right? Because if we can use our machines, like you said, we use robots and all this stuff, we can essentially maximize how much we output and minimize how much work goes into it or how much labor, right? And so your point on um, economic value being your labor like translated to labor, that's true, right? But it's more than that. I think it's an energy, right? Like it could be any sort of energy. If you're a good communicator, that's not necessarily labor, but it's work, and it's a value that you're putting into the marketplace. And so my point is that within societal like if we could modify our mental model, right, but also have that mirror and modify our systems and our infrastructure to maybe have a different uh a different like society. I don't know how to put it, but like a
I,
societal like
I think
foundation. Yeah.
I think what you're saying is when people they propose certain problems or they propose certain solutions to things,
Right.
You're existing within your current systems,
Right.
and you have all these assumptions within your thought process of these current systems that exist. A good example would be you were saying, industrial revolution, what happened was cities were put away from farmland. They were separated because they could do manufacturing and like, let's separate all this and put this over here. And then all the food will be here. And then it's the same reason why people that grow up in cities, they'll want more of these dependence on government, where I think what needs to happen is a big mind fuck for me. I think I was 16. I was just doing landscaping or I was working on a farm, like just doing a bunch of different things over a summer. And I realized that everyone's house, they all just have grass. And all grass is a weed, where if you look at different countries below the equator, a lot of them will have fruit in their yard and they go, well, look at the GDP of this country. Look at how poor this country is. It's like, well, say someone lives in Thailand or something. And okay, well, their water supply is bad. That might be not the best example, but maybe someone lives in Peru or they live in Chile and they go, well, this is coastal and this is my house. Then we also have food all year here. And like if cities do not have to exist, but if some way that people want to continue to keep them existing, I think cities have kind of become obsolete, especially when you have the internet, where it's great to have people grouping together, but I think we should work more towards another, like that's the thing that I've been thinking about is having agriculture within a city, very surrounded. It's not separate, right? And then I also think if you look at North America and Canada, everyone just wants to go to these pre-existing cities where, there was a period of time where people had to put work in to build New York and Toronto. And, these cities were, Miami wasn't Miami, like when the French got here and they made Quebec City and Montreal, they didn't look like that. But it's like no one wants to put the effort out to build the infrastructure. And I think the infrastructure that is pre-existent doesn't work towards moving. All you're ever going to get is this is a 9 to 5. This person's doing office work. This person's going to do construction. This person's going to work on a farm away from the city to make the produce or to pick it, whatever, sort it. And then this person's going to ship it to the city. And there's this huge disconnect between all of these different things. And I think what needs to happen is we need to look at the infrastructure of our cities that exists right now, and they just need to be like they don't even need to be rebuilt. They just need to build more with different plans around infrastructure, and we could easily afford this if we start allocating our this is a really annoying thing because prior to globalization, taxation, a lot of it didn't exist. It was mostly tariffs and mostly everything was privatized, or if there was taxation that built infrastructure, it was organized because there was nothing there. So they actually really needed to use this money to fund building a city from scratch. But I noticed it's like Canada's completely, even like we have these mass amounts of people showing up here in the last 2 years, which they just go to cities. And, when my ancestors got here, or when different ancestors, like different people got here, some of them just started from scratch. They just built a city from scratch, or they built a town and a community and a group. People don't do that, and North America especially is empty all over the place. I can't understand why we don't have this amount of money and we can't consider making newer communities, right? Is that a possibility? Like, can we do that through privatization, or is that something feds would get involved in, you know?
Yeah, I don't think there's an easy answer. I think yeah, and your point on globalization, I feel like it's tricky because we have all these tools, right? Like we have the internet, but I don't feel like we are using it to our full capacity. Like I think there's a lot we could try to implement to create more decentralization where people can more so self-organize and create these ecosystems or this infrastructural system that is more aligned with the human spirit, right? Like your point on economic value, right? Like that's what I think our whole society is kind of based off these social and eco-political ideas of you know creating things such as products or services, right? And going back to our other podcast when we were talking about, well, ultimately, we are producing these things and providing, these things to increase our state, right? Like we're producing food not only for the enjoyment of the food, but just like to continue on and change our state, right? When you eat good food, um, food be thy medicine is how I say. It's a whole other topic, but if we really go to the core of it, yeah, like our society is built around increasing quality of life, right? And that is can be translated to economic value or economical energy, right? And so my take on it is we don't necessarily like have to like fit the old model into like the new, I guess, approach, right? If UBI gets implemented, right? You can't really imagine what it would be like if we had, like you said, a layout where um, we have farms kind of integrated into your homestead, but then you're kind of also built into this community. Maybe you have like a theater in your community, and uh, you know it's kind of everything's kind of integrated, right? Like you're able to still travel, and we have advanced technology, right? Like technology's still there, but we're now kind of spreading things out more, and not everyone clustered in one spot. It's more like
Like a
we're
like a town.
yeah, like a town, but more yeah, like a town, but like you know what I mean?
Sorry.
Yeah, I get what you're
Yeah,
saying.
I know what you're saying. You just went
Yeah,
out like
but like
I think,
yeah, like
yeah,
my point is what's
I
at the center of the town. You know what I mean? Like what's at the heart of the town. And I don't mean just
well,
like yeah.
it depends on different towns. For example, when a lot of towns across the east side of North America, either they were in Ontario or they were in Michigan or they're in Quebec or they're wherever, because they had a trading route. Like people don't realize a lot of towns they didn't just exist for no reason. They're like, oh, we have, this river going down. Let's build, steads around this river because it'll help us trade. And now we have planes and we have different ways of trading, right? And same with, there's certain areas where there has to be conditions to have airports, right? There needs to be conditions to have roads. That's why there's certain development as you go more west is harder because they have to scale mountains and they have to break through different areas to make roads. I think private property is still pretty important, not in a Bill Gates, I own all the farmland sense, more of a I have a house with my family and I don't think people should be able to, trespass or tread on my property or So I think what it is there's this pre-existing system that already exists, and there's people that ended up forming government through allocating, they got wealth in some way, whether they were old rich Europeans and they came to North America, or someone hit oil. Then they could lobby the government to fund certain plans in building infrastructure or making systems in a way that benefit a small interest of people because those people just had money at that time. I think those systems in a lot of ways are breaking down now. And I don't know if we're at the point where people can say, hey, I'm going to start making a new community. Because I think what it is communism just does not work. And I don't think what people are looking for is having immense amounts of wealth and capital or to spread the wealth around so no one has a safety net or so there's a safety net for everyone. I think if you look at it in different societies outside of Eurocentric ways of thinking, back to that word, kind of encapsulates a lot of ways people think. But you could take modern ways of looking at the world, just like these modern visions of how people view cities and towns and societies, and really go back to groups and indigenous people and different tribes. And not to say your people are going to be tribal, but the whole idea of a lot of North America was the reason we had provinces and states was because different people had different ideas and ways of thinking and living, so they decided to live in different areas. And I think maybe we've run out of areas where new ways of thought can be formed and people can, like what you're going to need is someone with enough money to buy enough land to create a town in a specific location and just try this. And it doesn't have to be a pre-existing through the pre-existing system of government or system of whatever. And it doesn't even need to be in North America or anything. Maybe it could be somewhere in Australia, or maybe it could be, just in some other area, like somewhere South America or on some island, right? Because really all you want is, you want creeks and ponds, you want fish flowing, you want salmon flowing, so it affects all of the all of the ground, so you can grow food. You want an abundance of all that. Like we don't really need to be living in the idea of having UBI, and we don't really need to be living in the idea of I personally think if you had a decentralized currency and you had internet, then you just lived in a somewhat, tribal society that had an abundance of food and you grow food, you can fish, you're around nature. I don't think you need to be someone's just living in they're living in Arizona and they just get money every month and they just live in a random house. It's like
Yeah,
people don't realize everything is physical, everything in the way we look at the world right now, it's physical. And the reason certain areas are rich and some are poor is for real reasons, right? Like New York had money because they industrialized and they started producing, metal. Texas and Alberta had money because they had oil. Certain coastal areas like Nova Scotia, PEI, they had whatever, they were making a lot of potatoes. Nova Scotia, oh, we can do fishing. Like certain cities, they existed because they had a reason to exist, where now people, they've been in such a sense of living in cities, they don't understand. Some areas existed because they could cut down trees and have lumber. That's why most of, northern the Western America, like that's why, like Washington and British Columbia, right? And then eventually, you get Silicon Valley and It's like they make software, but the money that they're making is coming from people that produce a good or service wants to buy a computer because that's going to help their system of saying running a business. This is going to help me with my accounting, so I'm going to buy this computer. Where it still offers value, but not the same amount of value that lumber can offer that can build a house, or oil can offer that can heat your home, or fish that can be cooked and you can eat, or groceries or produce, right? There's different
Yeah.
values, and then these other things start to occur because as a society we have our produce, we have our lumber, we have our homes, we can heat, now we have solar and wind and we have whatever. Like this stuff exists from a bottom. Like really poor countries, they still have to burn coal because they can't even get any infrastructure. Like when you ever see trains, when we had trains way back in the day, those coal trains, they had to burn coal to move a train across the country to be able to have people get their goods and services, right? They didn't have oil because they had to, they couldn't even drill. Like some things they couldn't even drill for oil, or oil could be drilled before you can decide to make a coal can be burned and oil can be used before you can even have a windmill or a solar panel. Because a solar panel you need to mine, right? And an electric car you need to mine cobalt, which you can't do that without coal, or you can't do that without have pre-existing energy sources. So people need to really get away from looking at money because it doesn't mean anything unless it's backed by labor, resources, etc. Right?
Or even just perception too. If something's
Yeah,
perceived as valuable or like perceived as premium, you know.
yeah. Well, Gucci and all those designer brands, they have a brand behind a name that people perceive that as valuable. Where gold is a finite resource and diamonds, they're finite resources, so they're objectively valuable. Years will go by where there will be, I don't know, any of the rich name brands, these luxury name brands, but whatever, Balenciaga or whatever. I only know that because of Kanye talking about it. But so say we go up a couple hundred years and someone sees Balenciaga shoes, and then they see some other random leather shoes that were made somewhere or some shit. I don't even know what they make. They make bags, whatever they make. They're not going to see the difference. They're just going to see two leather bags, right? So, I want something to hold my books because, or I want,
Yeah.
like you're not even going to notice that. You have a couple hundred years ago, you're not going to notice if this was a name brand pipe to smoke tobacco in. You're just going to have these pipes are made out of this and they work or they don't work, and they're built well or they're not. So even perceiving a brand or perception of income, like old currencies, like say old currencies, they don't even hold any value. A lot of them don't hold value anymore because they're not used.
Yeah.
And unless that can be melted down into something, old currencies don't mean anything. Like
Yeah.
especially if you look at, like the Treaty of Versailles and the mark in Germany, and they were printing all this money to the point where the inflation was so bad that people were literally, they had wheelbarrows worth of money that they would bring to the grocery store to buy like a block of cheese. When people got paid in Germany after World War One, during that period of time with mass inflation, they got their paycheck and they ran to the grocery store because as the value of their money was going down and down and down before they could even get to the grocery store. And the inflation was happening so fast that the grocery store was raising the prices of the produce within 40 minutes, couple hours. That's how much the economy was drastically, like, because they were just printing money. And I think we were talking about this in the last podcast. If there's $100 in the circulation of an economy, right? Or let's just say 1,000 because it's easier. You have $1,000, and this is the same with a market cap. If you have $1,000 and someone has 100, your $100 can buy, I don't know, let's just say a boat motor or like a canoe or something. Then they print another $1,000. You can't buy that canoe with that same $100 that you have that you worked for, which is the same thing with UBI, where maybe UBI could work if the labor was based on some kind of AI technology where, but at the same time, it still can be inflation, right? But then you have, and it's really subjective to immigration too, because when you bring new people into society, it's almost a sense of inflation towards the taxpayer that has already lived there, right? So if you have like 10 seats on a bus and people paid taxes, pay for this city bus to get on, and then they bring in another 10 people that want to get on this bus. Now 10 people that paid for the bus that exists have to stand. And the
Mm,
people that are sitting or people that got there that just got to the country, they haven't contributed at all to the taxation that has built any of the infrastructure that's pre-existing, which is why countries like Sweden and Denmark and Finland that have these really, really socialized systems with a open market economy, like a capitalistic economy, taxation, and they have social programs, they're extremely strict on immigration because as soon as they bring immigrants in, it's going to influence the economy. It's gonna like as soon as you get one person showing up in the country and go, I'm gonna live here, you are inflating the taxation that has built the infrastructure where there might not be enough room on a bus. So someone paid for taxes for this bus to show up, then there's already a bunch of people on it. Or you miss a train, you paid for those taxes, your parents paid for those taxes, their grandparents paid taxes to build this infrastructure to be used, and now other people that didn't have a generation of spending their money and their labor to build said infrastructure are benefiting off the labor of the pre-existing societies that have already been here. So that's why if you want a society with something like UBI, you essentially can't have immigration to a high scale or even to a moderate scale,
right.
I think.
Yeah,
So
I never thought about it that way. That's a good point.
yeah,
I do
not
want
a
to,
lot of people
yeah,
do.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
for sure. I do want to make one more point though about like you were saying that if we did have individuals on UBI, then that would take from economic growth, which is a valid point. But I feel like there's a perspective that I feel like a lot of people don't really consider is also, if you're in survival mode, you might be in the workforce because you feel like, okay, I gotta be working this job so I can feed my family, right? That's a lot of people where if you ask them, like a majority of people, you ask them, hey, like if you had the choice to do something else, like you would probably do it, right? And I'm not, like work is work. I feel like it gives you purpose, it gives you structure, it gives you meaning. But I feel like because they've kind of gotten into, like at least from my experience, sometimes like you just kind of get pushed into a job or into a role, or just it kind of comes your way, and then you get locked in and you're there for a while, and meanwhile you never really considered um, whether you even wanted to be there or whatever. It was just kind of like, okay, I just needed a job at the time, um, and so
I
you're,
want to unpack a bit of this if that's okay.
yeah. Well, can I finish this just so I can kind of get it out?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
like, like people again in poverty, they're gonna rob places so they can feed their family, right? They're doing what they can, and it causes all kinds of issues. And my point would be, okay, well, if people get lazy, like, which is, if they're just getting their needs met and stuff, that's great. I feel like that's where people like should be at. But I think there's also another step to implementing a system of this type, which would be like to inspire. And I would say that because I'm not saying entirely the system was built off survival mode, but a lot of it is, like you said, a lot of the labor, that's pretty prevalent. But if we created a system that inspired or like gave people routes where they have all this free time, so they might as well make podcasts, might as well make art, you might as well make music, might as well make a little community, start some sort of organization, and maybe have like festivals or whatever, right? And maybe start
I,
to build a homestead,
yeah, I think festivals. I think this is what I'll say. I think when people make social assistance or they make something like UBI, it would almost be better to go, listen, some people are going to use this to get out of poverty, and some people are going to use this to not really do anything, or they just want to exist and be left alone, which is influence is from other people's labor. But some people are just disabled and they just can't. And some, but I think what would make more sense is the amount of money that are allocated to some people is because they don't have any incentive to be in a workforce, and they go, oh, there's no point to this. Where it would almost be making private businesses. I don't even know if it's the greatest group to really like look into, but some people they go, oh, I need a job for survival, and then they get a job working for whatever, right? And that is taking up their time away from them being able to create something that might be more valuable to society, but they had to exist in a pre-existing role because they need to not freeze to death or starve, where maybe if there was some, I don't know if it's nonprofits or there's some kind of something that would allow people to, I guess you need the incentive to get a loan. But what is weird to me that they want everyone in education and a lot of like this is something I want to go into the education system a little bit because
Yeah.
they want everyone to go to university out of high school, but university is not what it used to be, where you would go to universities. The universities in Russia right now, if you go to them, they teach you skills, and someone learns a skill that's going to help build infrastructure in society or be work in agriculture or do whatever, right? That'll be that'll be doing whatever. And everyone just learns ideology, they learn social science, and that doesn't actually, not everyone can be in social sciences, not everyone can be a philosopher, a psychologist, because if everyone did that, no one is planting the food or no one is wiring your house or there's been such a problem with trades of saying trades are such a, stupid people do trades. But if they made it so there could be these degrees where you could there could be a higher class of tradesmen where sure, there's still apprenticeship programs, but there could be higher classes of tradesmen, which would allow people to be surrounded by other smart people that are interested in working in, you know, those kind of environments. Because I think a big problem is there's all these 4-year apprenticeships to learn different trades. A lot of people are smart enough that have interests in this, but they won't because, it's like they could probably learn a lot of these trades within 6 months to a year, but there's no accelerated program that exists. And I think we should make some accelerated programs because that would really bolster the economy because smart people could really rush into learning a lot of these things where it shouldn't have to take a lot of these people 4 years to learn these things where, a lot of people do 4 years of this because they don't have the ability to do anything else. Or there should be some incentive to funding, like being like, oh, well, you're not looking for a job and you're on UBI. Why? What do you want to do? How can we support you in this? Maybe this can be an investment that will be better than just giving you money every month, because maybe there is someone that just, you can't get loans to start a business, but you can get loans for student loans,
Yeah,
right? It's easier to get approved for a student loan than it is for a loan for a business, which I think that's detrimental to a growing society and to the interests of people. It's like they don't want, it's almost like privatization has become an enemy to the government in the West
I agree.
because it's going to give people, they don't want people to be independent. They don't want people on farms. Like when I was growing up and I was in high school, they'd go, oh, there's tradespeople, there's a farmer. They're all stupid. That's what they wanted you to think growing up. But then it's like, yeah, take a 7 year philosophy degree and then just talk in a room and then just be doing word vomit or just, taking English. Like there's still use in those upper studies, but they shouldn't necessarily even be considered upper studies. It's just a different thing to learn. And I was thinking about you a lot, and I think a boot. I was thinking a shoe. I think you could be you ever think of doing like agriculture? Or you ever think of like you always talk about, oh, I want to make a homestead, I want to make a farm, or I want to do this, or make some kind of like maybe go to school for agriculture.
Are you joking?
No, did you already go to school for agriculture?
Yeah.
What happened?
It's a long story. I don't know. Do you want to get into it?
Yeah, go ahead. We're just chatting.
Yeah,
I think if you did tell me that, but it would have been years and years ago, at
yeah.
least 3 years ago, probably at this
That's
point.
fine.
So pardon me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like everything's kind of led me here, you know? Like I feel like everything that I've gone through has kind of led me to this like point of um yeah, just where having this conversation, you know? Um and I feel like I haven't really been in a place to be able to articulate my journey and the things I've seen and experienced, you know? Like I've kind of always been an observer and watched from the sidelines. You know, I've also been pretty engaged and stuff as well. Like I'm quiet. I don't really always speak my mind. And so when I was going through school, like first of all, I did go to school. I'm not gonna really go into specifics, but I went to study agriculture. And when I got there, you know, I always felt like uh not that I was ahead of it, but like I realized like what I was learning in high school and stuff was pretty much the same level that I was at. And so I kind of paid attention. I remember telling my mom like I felt like I was the only one that wasn't already in the field, you know, like their family had a farm or their relatives had a farm or something like that. Like I've never stepped up foot on a farm like legit, and for some reason I picked
What?
I no for yeah, maybe like a small one, you know, like some like like one where you get pumpkins or something if that counts. But like I was never really out in like the no like on like a big scale farm like no like I've never like walked around or anything um until I mean university and stuff. But yeah, so I went into it because I was really science based, like I was really like hands-on type learning and stuff, and I thought like, well, I always wanted to have a homestead, so I thought it would be good to be able to grow my own food and learn that and have the skills. So I just was like, I don't know what else to do. Nothing else really spoke to me, and so I went to school and a few years in, I got really depressed. I was actually 2 years being vegan, and so combination of just kind of like being isolated. I didn't really like I had friends and stuff, but like I've always been, how I am, and so I've always kind of been like a hermit, I just think deeply about things, and I would party with my friends and stuff, but it was, you know, uh I felt like it was pretty overwhelming, I guess. There's a lot of things going on, and so I ended up dropping out. It was a combination of a few things. I was working a job in a kitchen and stuff, and I was learning a lot about the world and consciousness and my place in it. And I remember just listening to music and getting really inspired. And I thought, well, I have all this experience. I have all this insight, and I feel like um, it's not like I could go into this field and you know get a like be on a farm, and I still think like that would be cool. But at the same time, when I was meditating on this and thinking about this a lot, I was like, well, I've always wanted to like help people. Like I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to like I've always gravitated to people who have issues, and and I've always been empathetic. I've always wanted to help people in some regard, and as a society, I've always kind of seen how society functions and how we've been treated or whatever. I've always wanted to make a difference, and so with agriculture, I thought, well, if I could grow food uh, and provide people with nourishment, you know what I mean? Like that would be fulfilling to me. But then I also realized like industrialization happened. Um, there was a lot of lobbying, I guess you could call it, within the industry, right? I found out that the school that I was attending was actually being sponsored by Monsanto in some programs. And so they were actually marketing certain ideas to us. For the most part, it was pretty open minded. Like there were some courses that were really like, moderate. There wasn't any bias, but there was other ones that were fairly biased. I remember I literally had to do a program. There was this one course, and it was essentially you had to learn to innovate, right? And I went to my professor. I was like, hey, like I'm not from this field. I don't really know anything about it. And what he essentially got me to do is a project on feeding cows corn, which is not something you're supposed to do. Which later on I found out, well, that it's terrible for the animal. It's destructive to their gut. It causes gut rot, and this is why they get sick. And then we give them antibiotics, and then when you eat that meat, it's toxic, right? So I was doing this project, and I just the whole time I was like, why can't I find anything about creating the processed corn for these animals? Well, it's probably because we're not supposed to be doing that. But that's the program, is like you do what the professor tells you, and then you get graded on it. And so I didn't. The whole time I always had these views, and I always had this insight, but when I spoke my mind, they would give me bad grades. When I went against the grain, they would give me bad grades. When I said pesticides, we don't need to be doing this. We need to balance the ecosystem. They didn't give me good grades. So I kind of kept my head down. I was like, well, I need to pass these courses. Like these are my quote unquote superiors, even though all of this is colluded with big companies. So yeah, I ended up dropping out and ended up going back and finishing it because I never really had a platform to talk about this stuff. So yeah, I thought, well, I might as well get some experience and try to understand how society is and try to get to the core kind of how all of this stuff works. And so I actually did start growing my own food, and I actually started selling food too. I was selling like microgreens at the market. And yeah, my point to that was like I wanted to help people, but then I would try to give people like these microgreens and stuff, and a lot of people didn't want him. Like I would knock on people's doors like every night or whatever, every like once a week, however often, and I would ask them, hey, like, do you want some of these microgreens? I just grew them and all this stuff, and like I got a lot of people saying no, essentially, right? I mean, I could have kept doing it, but I was like working another job at the time too, and I was pretty tired and stuff, you know. And so
Yeah.
what I came to recognize too is that um, we as a society, you know, you go like you go and turn on your TV and you watch like a kids show, and then there's an advertisement for some sort of fast food, or you know, some sort of processed food, or some sort of cereal, or you know, and so you kind of get introduced to all this stuff, and then um, you know, all of that food is then obviously associated with these farms that are using these Monsanto products like Roundup, which is really destructive to your gut and your health and everything. And so I realized like, hey, I'm not really gonna make a difference if I'm just working for these corporations. And you know, like that's kind of how you got to get into it. Is you got to like join a farm, like you got to participate and be a part of the farm. So I actually the whole reason I went to BC, bro, and met all of you is because I was actually deciding to make the leap and actually say, hey, I'm gonna go and be a part of a farm, right? And this is where COVID happened, right? And that's
Yeah, we all got
yeah,
just couldn't really do anything.
yeah. So
Like,
I
yeah, it's
yeah,
good.
I moved. So I one day I just packed up and I ended up driving across the country. It took me like 7 days, and then I pulled up to the place I was supposed to be working at, right? And
Yeah.
they were like about to hire me, right? And I was looking at housing there. Housing was like nowhere. You couldn't find housing, first off. And then they didn't think to ask me. They didn't think like we didn't have this question or this conversation at all. But funny enough, they asked me, "Hey, are you vaccinated?" And I said, "No, I'm not vaccinated." And so they said, "Well, we'd really like to hire you. You know, you came all this way, whatever. Let us talk to the workers and see if they're okay with it, right?" And so these are all foreign workers. I don't know if you've ever like visited a farm, but a lot of foreign workers are on farms. There's a lot of them, and so
Yeah, I cherry picked
yeah,
that like I came I that's funny. I was leaving cherry picking. That's when I got there. That's where I met you. I met you after I left my cherry picking job in.
yeah, and I always like me being me. You know, I knowing that, seeing this whole setup, it was very industrial. These people weren't really like living in the best conditions. You know, they're just like picking um, crops all day, you know, and like probably not getting the best wage. I worked at a greenhouse one time. I got like $15 an hour, and it's like nothing, you know. And you're sweating all day and trying to feed your family. So I understood like they came back and said, hey, like yeah, we can't hire you. They're not comfortable with you not being vaccinated or whatever at the time, right? Which I understand because it's like they've been given all this propaganda and they're foreigners, so they're kind of already, you know, like yeah, they're kind of in a fight or flight, and so yeah, I ended up leaving, and that's when I went to Tofino and met up with you. So that was my whole my whole journey of like trying to pursue agriculture. Uh, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, I did tree planting and then I think, have you ever considered going to other countries that aren't monopolized by
Oh,
all of
100%.
these
Yeah, yeah.
large corporate?
Yeah. If I
Well,
would, I, you
I,
know.
well, there's this website I found while I'm talking to you. It's called worldpackers.com. I just sent it in the chat here, and you can just here's these people on a farm in Peru. They have a sustainability project. Come give us a hand on our farm in Peru. 16 hours per week. farming, building, repairing, gardening, painting and decorating. Uh, $50 USD per week. So this is not a lot of money, but I think this would almost be an interest because this would give you a place to stay, right? I'm going to tree planting in Australia. Like if you did something where you could get a large amount of money in a little bit, then you could do something afterwards that is going to, just give you experience or kind of give you a perspective shift, right?
Yeah, I mean, I probably, I mean, I don't really want to talk about this on a podcast, but I just feel like
Yeah, no worries.
it's
It's
gonna be
just,
it's gonna
just
be a while before any of that. But yeah,
yeah. I'm excited. I feel like I'm in a big travel mood right now. Super excited to be getting out of BC right now. Just experiencing new things, seeing new things.
yeah, man. I've been trying to trying to get you to do that for a while. I always felt like it's always like I always felt like you needed a community. I feel like we all kind of need support. Like we always need um yeah, just like unconditional love. Like that's a big component
That's
of
true.
whether or not we're thriving as a society. I feel like like people get sucked into the like we were talking about before. Um, it's kind of like these games, like
hmm
and I
I was really,
yeah.
I was really just attached to music, where I think that's what's kept me here for so long is I got into a good music community, and now I need to realize, like, yeah, this is time to let go and to move on and to go on to different things in your life, you know?
Yeah.
I think that's kind of, there's always energy shifts, so then that'll push you towards doing new things, right? And right now, like, I'm really spiritual, but I feel 2025, at least around this month in December in 2024, there's a lot of crazy shifts in energy that are pushing people in all kinds of different directions, and I'm finally feeling like I'm getting pushed enough that, yeah, it's time to go. Time to try something new.
Yeah, bro. I'm gonna give you some encouragement because even just from what you've said on this podcast to this point, like you are like very brilliant, bro, and a lot of people aren't gonna be on your level. Like a lot of people aren't gonna see eye to eye on that level, right? Like it's completely that's completely understandable, but at the same time um you can't let the world tell you who you are. Like you have to tell the world how to treat you, right? At the end of the day. And you got to know that down to your fucking core, bro. Like no one can shake you, and don't ever like back down, and don't ever let people like tell you um how you need to like yeah, I mean like just how you need to engage and go about your business. You know what I mean? Like your journey's your own journey, uniquely yours, and like keep like spreading vibes just how you are. And yeah, bro,
Yeah,
like like you get things, you have the knowledge, and it's a matter of just like bringing that down. And like I'm the same way, like just bringing that stuff down and getting getting grounded, and working with your community. I feel like it's tough, bro. It's tough because I feel like a lot of people again aren't able to really get it, and it's like no fault of their own. Like they're not like it's hard. We're all working jobs. We're all managing our own shit, trying to make ends meet and everything. And so it's hard for people find the energy
Yeah,
to, to like build on this. Like all of this stuff that we've been talking about is like, is it, like there's a lot of value and a lot of stuff we can explore within it. Like I'm still going to reflect, I'm going to listen back and reflect on that one quote, the
for
Plato,
sure.
and
Yeah,
I hope that people like listening to this, I noticed there's a lot of like this one was very what do you call it, like it's informative. There's a lot to kind of sift through, and I feel like there's some moments that are digestible, but a lot of it you kind of have to listen to it like a few times over, like to really like internalize it. But I feel like that's the process, is to remain in like the exploration, to remain in the curiosity, and how like your life is unraveling in front of you, and just being present for that, and taking like one step at a time with what's coming. Like I feel like my attitude nowadays is, what is this teaching me, and what is my life like the way it is today? Like what is the meaning behind this? Even if it's just you're walking down a fucking street, it's like, why this street? Why at this time? Like why you feel this type of way that you feel, and like what's the overall meaning behind it, or at least your subjective meaning behind it, and what can you take from it? I feel like a lot there's this like thing I saw, I don't know where I saw it, but they're essentially saying how there's so much going on, like you'll be doing one thing and you'll be thinking about the next thing, and you're never actually enjoying the thing in front of you. You know what I mean? Like you're not enjoying the coffee that you're drinking. You're thinking about how you're going to get to work. And then when you're at work, you're thinking, "Oh, like what am I going to make for dinner?" You know what I mean? And you're never actually like interacting with the people around you. And then when you're making dinner, you're like, "Oh, well, what am I going to watch after dinner?" And like then you're thinking, "Oh, while you're watching it, oh, well, I got to go to sleep and stuff." And so you're never actually present and fully in creator mode, and actually grounding everything, right? Like you're not actually applying the things. And so that's what I'm on now. Like uh I'm not trying to just consume everything. Like that's why I love this podcast. I really find like when you articulate things that you've experienced and you get it out there, then it becomes real. It becomes something that's tangible, right? It's not just an idea. It's not just a thought. It's very
yeah,
healing, you
exactly.
know. So
You're
I
putting something out there.
yeah, I love this. I love this, man. It's really been really good. Really, yeah, man. It's very therapeutic, and just like even having you, bro. I really appreciate you, because I sometimes just riff off about random shit, and
Yeah, thanks.
yeah,
Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciated all those good things you said about me, and I think this is a good platform to just, you're a really interesting guy, and I think in terms of having conversations and being able to go, oh, what's this guy really thinking about? Because I feel a lot of intelligent people tend to struggle in communicating their ideas into like language. Some people linguistically, you have great speakers, right? Where they can speak. And then you have people that their ideas are so good and they're so vast. It's almost like talking about Plato's theory of forms, where I can't put this form into language, or I can't put this into communicating. So I think it's really therapeutic that I get to listen more, and I get to listen to what's going on, you know what I mean? Like what you're thinking about, and being able to maybe try to reiterate it, or try to have you relate to what I'm saying, you know what I mean?
yeah, totally. And I feel like with language, right? Like, I mean, we could say a lot of things about it, but when you're on, like, some people could listen to this, and especially like if you're a foreigner or something, right? Like, it could sound just like words and nonsense.
Gibberish.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But it's also like, we're on a certain frequency, we're on a certain vibe, and so makes complete sense to us. Like we might not have to be super like precise, but we are putting out a certain energy. Um, I think it's important to be precise, but I also think if you're flowing like this, especially like just the way how we do it, like we kind of understand intuitively because we have our own experience, and so we can draw on our experience. And I feel like when people are really connected to their own experience and they think similar to us, and are on a similar frequency, like this is just a broadcast, right? So I feel like we just put this stuff out, and whoever it needs to find it, like that's I feel like organically people will find it who need to find it, right? It's like that's just the frequency of the universe. I feel like when people are ready for it, they'll find it. I see that with life as well. It's like when you're ready, when you're prepared and you've put the work in, like that's when the life provides you with the next stage.
Yeah, definitely being ready to receive, being able to produce. I think it's a lot of different things being present. I think as someone that's very ADHD, I don't thrive in cities, I found. I just don't. I think too many distractions, too stressful. I'm not present. I've grown up around farms. I've grown up in the country, and it always seems I just always revert back to tree planting whenever if anything turns into a mess, I can just go and tree plant again. And that would be something I'd be interested in talking about a little more, where you go out there with just a shovel and trees, and you're really just you're just out there. You're just with your thoughts. You get old thoughts from forever ago. It's like an 8 hour nature walk just alone, which that's the Canadian one, but the Australian, you're kind of more in groups of people, but it's just you and your shovel, and it's like you wanna produce, you wanna, you know, make your income, make as much money as you mentally can. It's like a mental push. But I think, yeah, I personally think cities earn it. You know,
Yeah, no comment. I'm not gonna comment. I want everyone to share their opinions on here and stuff. And I'm also like, I'm not. I don't want this podcast to be super divisive either. Like I invite all
oh,
different
that's
perspectives
true.
and like
I,
different
I'm
takes
I'm
and
I'm saying something personally to myself. I'm not saying that
no, like, and that's what I'm
it's
saying.
not.
You're entirely
Yeah,
valid. Like I feel like I'd actually kind of share in that as well. But that's
sentiment or
yeah,
yeah,
it's that sentiment. But like I'm also similar to you in that like I like slower pace. I'm more thoughtful of a person. Like
yeah.
but it's at the same
I
time like I also enjoy the challenge of like fast paced things. Like I do engage in like video games that are fast paced and so I try to adapt a little bit, but I'm not like
hmm
super in it. But that's why I'm also like right outside of the city. I grew up right outside of the city, so that's kind of what I'm used to. So that's how I adapted.
yeah, that's true. I mean, I definitely like being around a lot of people and getting exposed to different cultures, but I definitely like having a slow pace and being out in nature, going into, I think that's
I
why I
I think
gravitated
that's
to
I think that's
BC for
I
as
think that's
long as I have,
objectively
or same with you. That's probably why you gravitated coming out here, is to just be in the nature,
nature
you
is
know?
like objectively good for you. Like I feel like if you're in a city
But
and you're
yeah, I don't know
surrounded
where
by
you're at,
concrete,
but
like you can't like
uh,
you can't
I wouldn't mind wrapping this up.
yeah, no, I was thinking the same thing. Yeah. Okay, so at this point, Shane was having some connection issues from my memory, and yeah, we didn't really get to close off of um, the whole discussion. And again, we want to we want to say we really appreciate you for tuning in and this is all like really new to us. It's a learning experience, and so we do, we listen back to it and then we make adjustments. And yeah, I think it over time you'll know like we'll get better for sure, and we'll be more fluid, um, and come more prepared. I feel like again, going back to my intro when I was talking about how the kind of energy in the beginning wasn't quite right, and then over time we kind of loosened up, and the vibe changed, which is why I love doing this because it is a yeah, it's very therapeutic, and it does help me externalize a lot of the things that I'm experiencing. And so I hope that this podcast was really powerful for you, and maybe gave you some insights as to maybe why just like why you're in the state you're in, or like how your world has been shaped, right? And so there's some there's some really deep points here, just really profound things in this podcast that I highly suggest you maybe meditate on. Um, yeah, I haven't actually gone through and listened to it all yet for the second time, but from my memory, there's some key points about UBI, uh, and so yeah, we're curious as to whether you think that that would be viable, and if there is is there a certain system that you could see put into place that would maybe correct a lot of the issues that we're seeing today with the revolving doors, like we talked about in the first episode, and centralized media. And so we want to hear from you. Let us know in the comments. Let us know. Leave us a like if you liked it, just for the algorithm, so other people can find this stuff. Because we're so new, we do believe that these ideas are very powerful, but it's up to the audience and everyone to get this out there and help us out. Um, we'd love for you to be involved as well if that's what you feel called to. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. We're always very grateful, and we'll catch you on the next one. Every single episode, we're going to get a little better at this. So stay blessed, everyone, and catch you later.